All right, we're recording now. I'm just going to pause a few seconds and then I'm going to introduce you and we'll get cracking.
Super.
Hi everyone and welcome to the Jeff Bullish Show. And today we're going to be having a chat with Dr. Jemma Green, who's the Executive Chairman of a company, Power Ledger. So a little bit about Jemma before we dive into discovering her story. After completing a degree in finance, Jemma started a career in banking at JP Morgan in London. While there, she saw firsthand the dilemmas and problems that came with bringing corporate social responsibility to the business world. After a decade in the UK, Jemma returned home to Perth to pursue a doctorate at Curtin University in electricity market disruption, which she completed in 2017. This work turned out to be the perfect segue to starting up her own business, a blockchain-powered peer-to-peer energy and carbon credit trading platform called Power Ledger. The company is 3 years old and has projects in the US, Japan, Europe, Thailand, and Australia. Jemma is an expert in residence at Curtin University, helping with commercialization of technology and the startup ecosystem. She also serves on the board of Water Corporation. Somehow, she's found time to become a Deputy Lord Mayor of the City of Perth and the mother of 2 children. Jemma's helped set up Australia's first fossil fuel-free superannuation fund and has sat on numerous boards championing sustainable business. But there's more. She gives regular talks on technology and leadership in business and recently received the Ernst Young FinTech Entrepreneur of the Year Award. And also, she was the winner for Sir Richard Branson's Extreme Tech Challenge in 2018. Jemma, it's great to have you on the show, and that's quite a resume, and it's so great to have you here. Now, I'm going to confess up front here, my area is more in digital business and digital marketing, but in peer-to-peer, power trading and blockchain, I'm a little bit of a newbie. So I'm looking forward to our conversation. So great to have you on the show, Jemma, and thank you for giving us the time.
Thank you for having me.
So this is, you've done quite a lot. And so you started off in banking at JP Morgan and went to London. What sort of motivated that to go and leave the beautiful city of Perth and Australia?
Well, my father was Irish, and I'm the beneficiary of an Irish passport, which meant that I could live and work in Europe, and it's kind of a sort of rite of passage for young people in Perth, at least, to finish their degree and do a bit of travelling. And I didn't anticipate in advance staying away for more than a decade. It was really a kind of a year or two long trip.
Right, okay.
But just got extended on an annual basis. I'll stay another year, and hey presto, it was nearly 11 years. So yeah, it wasn't through kind of architecture in advance that I'm going to do it like that. It just happened.
So life unfolded and you were enjoying London. Yeah, London's one of my favourite cities. I've got a cousin who lives there with his partner, and it's one of my favourite cities in the world, and I love going back. So I can sort of see why you ended up sort of putting a stake in the ground and spending that 10 years. So you worked in JP Morgan and you saw the dilemmas and problems that came with corporate social responsibility or lack thereof. Can you tell me a little bit more about what was unfolding and what were your thoughts at that time?
Sure. So around 2005-06, I think the banks were starting to realise that it wasn't just a matter of ensuring that the money they lent out to companies would be returned, but there were other expectations of society, and these kind of notions of social license to operate started to emerge. So banks started to be attacked by activist organisations for funding rainforest destruction or employing child labour, and these kinds of things started to become issues for the bank and areas of concern. And so at that time, most of the banks were setting up environmental and social risk management units to look at their lending and underwriting activities in developing countries where there perhaps weren't very good environmental and social regulations, or they existed but they weren't particularly well implemented. and JP Morgan was no exception in terms of taking a keener interest in this topic. And I was at that time already working in the bank, but in equity derivatives in risk. And the bank decided to set up that function, the global function, based out of the London offices. And I had just completed a voluntary project in the office to introduce recycling bins. And it was very fun and exciting, but also it was amazing to me to see how much resistance there was to a very simple change in behaviour. And I just became very curious about what it would take to get people to change the way that they did things or required things of clients. And was fortunate enough to be chosen to help set up the team that looked at the bank's lending and underwriting activities in high-risk sectors, so mining, oil and gas, electricity, power markets, commodities, heavy manufacturing, forestry, pulp and paper, and things like that. So I ended up doing that for about 6 years and went on and did a master's by research looking at sustainability as well, focused on more mining and oil and gas sectors, and looking at a BP Deepwater Horizon spill and whether you could have seen that coming by virtue of how they were managing and mitigating their environmental risks, and whether that was baked into their credit ratings. And saw that actually you could have anticipated many of the things that had ultimately eventuated by virtue of the kind of leading and lagging indicators they had around environmental risk management and health and safety risk management.
Right, because you were in the risk area, weren't you? Is that one of your key responsibilities?
Yeah, so I mean, in my it was more looking at areas of financial risk in my old job, but in that area it was really looking at environmental risk, but looking at the kind of intersection between them and how they're quite intimately related. And so how poor environmental performance can ultimately become a financial issue, and in the case of BP resulted in their credit rating being downgraded multiple notches and nearly led to their demise, because the perception around them was that they may not actually deal with this mess appropriately. And their initial reactions were, it was the subcontractor's fault. But the US government's reaction was, notwithstanding whatever kind of multi-agency contractual arrangements you've put in place, we think you are culpable, you are responsible.
The buck stops with them.
Yeah, exactly. And it wasn't till BP said that we'll ultimately take responsibility for this, notwithstanding the contractual legal view of the situation, that their share price stopped declining. And also the banks were at that time in a sort of Mexican standoff with each other to see if they'd pull liquidity from BP, which would have ultimately led to their demise as well. And so it wasn't till those statements came out that there was a kind of shoring up of confidence in them and their ability to deal with it in the way that society would. So yeah, I looked at that and a range of other mining, oil and gas companies, and as part of my master's research into this topic. And I just found it really fascinating to see this kind of changing norms and expectations of companies, both the companies themselves and also the financiers of those companies.
So you were doing the master's in London?
At Cambridge.
At Cambridge, okay. So in Cambridge. So you then decided to come back to Perth and do your doctorate in electricity market disruption. So obviously was this master's one of the sort of major, I suppose, discovery points that sort of drove you to come back and do that at Curtin University?
Not exactly, no. So I submitted my master's thesis and I'd been working full time and studying part time, and I was quite tired. So I took a sabbatical and travelled quite extensively for about 9 months. And I did quite a bit of hiking. I did the Camino de Santiago and hiked through the Middle East and Nepal and South America. And originally I was actually going to come and live in your city in Sydney.
Right, okay.
And work in a bank. And I just felt, I really like to come home to Perth, and there's not really any investment banks here. And so it necessitated me thinking of some other thing to do with my career. And I actually had a sinking feeling that, oh, my exciting career days would be over in returning home to Perth, that I was effectively, prioritising coming home to my family over having a career that I found particularly fulfilling.
Right.
A friend of mine who'd done a PhD, I shared with her on my hikes, I had this idea that I'd like to build an eco-village, and she said, oh, why don't you do a PhD in that topic and better inform the design of the development? And I shared this idea with a professor here at Curtin University called Peter Newman, and he said, oh, that's a great idea, you should do that, and I'll get you a scholarship. And it just became, oh, this is something that I'll do to see what happens next. And I designed a solar and battery system for an apartment building, and then I wanted to create like a trading environment inside the development where you had been allocated units of solar electricity, and if you weren't home to consume that, you could trade that with your neighbours. But there wasn't any software I could find that would actually facilitate that. And by chance, about 2/3 of the way through my PhD, a former banking colleague of mine who's based in Sydney, he introduced me to these two blockchain people in Perth and said, oh, you should meet them, they're doing some interesting stuff. And I had a conversation with them, and they shared with me about this thing called the blockchain and how it was changing so many things in the world, and they were super excited about it, and I didn't really understand. But subsequent to that meeting, looked into further details around what this technology did and whether there were applications in electricity, and saw indeed there were, and started exploring that in more detail, and introduced the blockchain people to a couple of other people in energy. And about 4 months later, we set up Power Ledger in May of 2016.
Wow.
So it was, again, not by kind of grand architecture. It kind of fell into this business and fell into being an entrepreneur. It wasn't my intention. I thought I would end up getting a job at the end of my PhD. And and so I think we turned 4 in May of 2020. So
wow.
Yeah, it was entirely a surprise, but I've just feel incredibly blessed, and that it's a kind of once in a lifetime opportunity, and I feel very excited to be able to do the work that we're doing every day.
Yeah. Well, I think what's fascinating to hear, the first part of your story here, is that what you're doing actually is potentially exponential in its spread, but it's the intersection of multiple technologies that allow that to happen, isn't it? So you've got blockchain, you've got battery technology, and you've got solar technology. And also there's a social movement happening that people want to look after the planet. We're on this planet Earth together. We actually can't keep trashing it, and we need to look after it, and social responsibility. So, and you stepped back from this busyness that you would have obviously been involved in London. And busyness is almost worn like a badge of honor, but you stepped sort of off the planet and into quietness for 9 months. And you just by accident met someone where you discussed an idea. And I think it's really, I never cease to be amazed by what shows up when you actually take the time to not be so busy and to actually do that. So, you met these two guys, you start Power Ledger. So I've taken a few notes about what you guys do. And so you're essentially in the areas of energy trading. In other words, we now have solar panels on roofs, and we now have battery packs, which are essentially being democratized and pushed by Elon Musk and other entrepreneurs now, which allows us to store power for peak reasons. And then they also do environmental commodity trading, which is more in the blockchain area, which provides the security and stops double counting and makes it more accountable. And then you've also in the area of renewable asset ownership. So tell me a little bit about, so blockchain, you started it, you met the two guys on, you started Power Ledger, you met these two guys on blockchain. So you started the company. Tell me a little bit more about how the energy trading works, because I think that's maybe the best place to start.
Sure. So we connect to smart meters to measure output of generation assets, so solar farms or wind farms or any type of generation, battery and the consumption side, so the meter at a house or a business. And that creates a record of a transaction between the generator as seller and the consumer as buyer.
Mm-hmm.
And using the blockchain, what it provides is the ability for the transaction and settlement to be one entry on the ledger, and thereby facilitating, real-time agile trading and settlement environment.
Mm-hmm.
And why that is exciting is that electricity markets typically settle quite latently. Households get their bill every 60 days and pay 30 days later. And using a blockchain, you can actually create a more efficient market,
right,
and facilitate more complex types of trades. So if you've got multiple electricity retailers, they could trade with each other's customers. So you might have one retailer that could trade with another retailer's customers and settle on the blockchain. And so if that household's got a battery, it could be selling to its own retailer or another retailer, and optimize the income for its battery into selling into the peak. So having cross-retailer trading and settlement without the need for like an intermediary or an exchange. And the retailer has an alternative source of supply of electricity services, so things like frequency and control services, to the wholesale market, and the ability to purchase those perhaps at a discount to the wholesale market, so cheaper hedging, and that they could do so and attract and retain their own customers as well, or those in the trading network.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly on the east coast of Australia, the national electricity market, that's very attractive because there's too much renewables, like too much solar and wind. It's caused instability in the system, so it's actually caused very significant problems. And the battery storage is able to absorb that during the day and then dispatch it later at night. And it can just absorb it during the day and be used for self-consumption in the home, but a more higher value use of that is also to size the battery larger and then dispatch into the market. And so it could enhance the payback period on the investment in a battery. And for households that are already contemplating putting a battery in, this is an extra income kicker or passive income source.
Yes. Yep.
So I think that what the blockchain facilitates is a very real-time and agile and efficient market, and the ability for a market mechanism that's low cost to integrate to drive the actual physical outcomes you want in the electricity system, as opposed to how it's been for pretty much a century, where the physical electricity system was built as it was, and then the market sat on top of it. So it's kind of reimagining how the system works, driven by market mechanisms, and democratizing power and enabling citizen utilities to participate in those markets.
It's interesting. You've got quite a few different stakeholders in the matrix, haven't you? You've got the power companies, then you've got the distributors as well that run the grid. They're quite often separate, aren't they? Is that correct?
Yeah, you'll often find that they are separate, but they are absolutely a piece of the puzzle, and they need to be paid for use of their network. And electricity moves across the network like any network access arrangement, whether it be rail, railways, or internet or electricity networks. They're a stakeholder in the market.
Yeah. So Power Ledger maybe couldn't have existed 4 or 5 years ago because the intersection of the technologies wasn't available at that stage. Would that be a correct statement or not?
Certainly, where there are no smart meters, it's not possible to create that kind of real-time trading environment. You'd be effectively reading the meters every 2 months in arrears and retrospectively running trades. Yeah. So yeah, it's driven by the advent of smart meters, a lot of solar in the system, and now volatile prices, which are making the economics of batteries stack up. So it is a kind of coalescing of these factors. And as you say, there are many sort of actors involved in bringing all this together. Yes, so it is a kind of perfect storm.
Yeah. How long have smart power meters been actually in the Australian market and even globally?
Well, there's mass rollout that's been going on for the better part of a decade. In Australia, Victoria has widespread adoption of them, and there's rollout in every other state and territory underway right now. So,
Right.
like for example, in Italy, the entire country has smart meters. Germany doesn't have smart meters. They have actually some concerns around privacy, around the kind of revealing what you're doing in your house by virtue of what you're consuming electricity-wise. But by and large, there's a global trend towards adoption of smart meters.
Right. So what's the penetration rate in Australia with smart meters from your data or research? What do you think's
I
sitting
don't
around?
know nationally where we're at right now, but I think, for example, in Western Australia, they're going to roll out a couple of 100,000 over the next few years. And I think there's about 900,000 households. So I think in the case of Victoria, they did it all as one like large rollout that happened in quite a short space of time. And there were quite a few lessons that were learned from that are kind of been incorporated into the designs that you're seeing for different types of smart meters that are being implemented in other states and territories in Australia.
Right. So is Victoria leading the way nationally in the Australian market?
Insofar as that there's like 100% adoption of smart meters in the state of Victoria, yes.
Wow. Okay, cool. And so internationally, you've got countries like you mentioned, Italy's got 100% penetration rate. What about the US? Is that, where's that sit?
So it varies from state to state. So where you have deregulated markets, then you'll often find smart meters have been installed. So where there's more competition, so that would be in Texas, New York, California. These are the places where you see a lot of smart meter adoption.
Right, okay. So now obviously the grid's been designed for 100-year-old infrastructure. I have heard in some of my reading over time is that the grid is designed to operate for an old style system, which is now being disrupted. So what are some of the challenges for the grid as you see them?
It's quite a lot. So firstly, the system has been largely characterised by big power stations sending electricity in one direction, so a unidirectional system sending direct electricity to people's homes and businesses. And that would be, largely coal and gas-fired power stations. And then in the past 15 years, as people have installed rooftop solar, the distribution part of the electricity network has also been a source of generation of supply, not just the transmission network bringing electricity to the distribution network. And then there's been income generated from those solar assets, initially by virtue of large government subsidies and more recently smaller ones through feed-in tariffs. And now with batteries also providing either subsidies from government to drive the adoption of them, from subsidies and grants, and then also through virtual power plants, providing an economic incentive for people to purchase them, that it provides that sort of income enhancement to them. But if you just look at the amount of solar and wind, both large-scale and small-scale solar and wind, so some of the large-scale solar and wind has been in the transmission network, but that also has caused system instability because, for example, the wind might be blowing when the electricity is not needed, and that actually causes issues in the grid, oversupply, or too much solar in the day in places where it's not needed. So this causing kind of blackouts and system interruption. So there's a need to actually absorb that electricity by some means, whether it be through kind of into a battery or using it to power turbines for pumped hydro storage or things like this. And so there's lots of different things that are being investigated to absorb that electricity so that it doesn't cause the system problems. And so the most basic thing is absorb it into a battery and then consume it at that wherever the battery is located. But a higher order use for is, in addition to that, is to actually dispatch it into the market and provide services. So it's kind of like the batteries are the kind of providing the assistance to deal with the problems that renewables have created.
Yep. So my observation is that the battery, which can store energy that can't be used at a current time, because the biggest issue with renewables has been baseload, isn't it, really? So wind runs when it wants, solar only turns up during the day. So So you got,
Correct. So
yeah.
that's baseload power is one aspect of it, and then also dealing with things like frequency control and ancillary services as well that baseload providers deliver to the market that batteries could do in lieu of traditional sources of baseload.
Yeah. So what you're doing is you're bringing democratization to provision of power, aren't you? That's really, and also enabling people to use renewable power to actually feed the grid. So where do you see the, I suppose, how quickly do you think this is going to take up and disrupt the market? And also the other part is the electricity companies. Do you see them as being in danger over the years or in the future? Because the power's being distributed by everyone or provided by everyone into a grid. Electricity companies aren't going to go away, but how do you see that playing out? The individual providers on a micro level, almost like it's like what happened to computer power back in the 70s and 80s. The PCs turned up and democratized computing, whereas before it was always centralized. So mainframes just basically are still part of the game, but nothing like we are seeing today with personal computers being everywhere, which is the democratization of knowledge. You're looking at the democratization of power. So what do you think the future is for electricity companies?
If you look historically at other sectors, like, use the mainframe example, IBM used to do with mainframes and then got into personal computers and now does a lot of consulting services, and they really evolved their product offering, business model and commercial models to adapt around the new market conditions.
Yep.
And I think with incumbent utilities, it will be the same thing. So those that want to innovate and not just, around the edges will start to offer new products and services that are providing value to consumers in this market. So for example, selling solar and battery systems to customers or offering them to them with no money up front under a power purchase agreement, assisting customers to monetize their investment in that. So the retailer buying ancillary services from its customer rather than the market, and therefore endearing the customer to them, facilitating the customer making more money through looking at different income streams through cross retailer trading and settlement. So our view is we partner with retailers, and it's a service that we offer to them that they want to allow their customers to trade peer-to-peer or trade into the virtual power plant for our transactive energy product portfolio. And in doing so, they are able to give customers what they want and create a more compelling proposition to them. And if you look at disruptive innovation theory, incumbent players that are perhaps losing market share or having their profit margins eroded can do one or a combination of three things. They could fight, flight, or innovate. And fight is perhaps fighting against renewable energy targets or fighting against feed-in tariffs, fighting against or trying to increase fixed charges so customers pay high daily fixed rates regardless of how much electricity they use from the grid. And there are examples of that going on all over the world in electricity markets. And then flight is either do nothing or divest. And we're also seeing large utilities, particularly in Europe, where the market has developed faster in terms of the energy transition, creating two separate entities, one with their old energy assets and one with their new, and selling down a lot of their old assets. So we're seeing that happen. Where they've got a view of that going, that's not long-term where we want to be. And even with petroleum companies doing that as well. So setting up large venture, corporate venture partnering arms where they're investing in new technology. So as an example, Shell has purchased ERM, one of the largest retailers in Australia, and also invested and wholly owns a larger solar company in India, and also Sonnen, a German battery manufacturer. So they're starting to kind of realign their business with the new trends that they see emerging. So flight can look like that. And then innovate means that you might be doing either non-cannibalistic or cannibalistic innovation. So non-cannibalistic innovation is where you pursue new things that you haven't done before. So a retailer might go to regional areas that it's not currently present in and start offering microgrids to displace diesel. Right. Cannibalistic activity is where they go to their existing customers and offer them products and services that reduce their profit margin, but they do so because if they don't, someone else will. So let's offer them solar panels, which means they'll buy less electricity from us, but we'll make money up front on the solar. And if we don't do that, someone else will. And it's in that space, I think, where you're going to see the utilities of today transform into the utilities of tomorrow that are very customer centric. And they're only just doing innovation around the edges. That's not going to happen. And I think you will see disruption occur, but not necessarily destruction of value for those utilities that want to innovate. And we see our product as supporting those that truly want to innovate and service the customer in new ways.
Right. So basically, the electricity companies that are going to survive in the future are those that disrupt themselves and innovate. And that's obviously going to be the case. So, Jemma, tell me, I'm interested in the business model and some of the challenges you've had as an entrepreneur. So we've talked about the tech, and I find that pretty exciting. I think you're in the middle of one of the most exciting times in power generation that the world has ever seen. And I think you're obviously passionate about it, and that's why you started Power Ledger. And I'm excited to see how it all unfolds. And this is going to be another century, isn't it, of innovation, because this is not going to change quickly. This is a long game.
It is. I think you'll see a lot more unfold in the next 3 to 5 years, though. That's going to be very formative in terms of what the next 10 or 20 years actually looks like.
Yeah. Well, when I left, my original career was a teacher. So I actually went and joined the technology industry in the mid-80s, and I leapt right in the middle of the PC revolution. And for the next 10 years, it was mind-blowing. It was a ball. It was like the Wild West ride. And you're right. I think what's going to happen is that there's going to be a lot of fast change, and then as any industry, it's then going to mature and become a much more. And we're seeing that happening with social media. Social media was the Wild West 12 years ago. Now it's big business. Facebook is now one of the largest companies in the world. So you're going to see the maturation of your industry, but this is going to be rapid, fast change over a few years. So in terms of Power Ledger, what were some of the challenges you had? Obviously, when you kicked it off, okay, who's going to pay for this? Like, who's going to pay for staff? Who's going to pay for my life? So what were some of the challenges, including the funding of Power Ledger, and how did you get started?
Well, the founders funded the business in the initial phase, and then we received some venture investment. And then we also undertook Australia's first initial coin offering. So we created a cryptocurrency called the Power Token, which is used as a bond on our platform for utilities to allow their customers to trade electricity. So it's a kind of security bond which replicates what happens in the electricity markets. So if you want to play in the wholesale market, you need to put up what's called a prudential, which covers the outstanding debts that you've got with other counterparties during the settlement period. And the Power Token replicates that on our marketplace, but because the settlement period is shorter, the bond requirements are too.
Right.
And so we did that in 2017, and we raised $34 million, which provided a very good chunk of funding for an early stage company, and meant that a tech company based in Perth was able to compete internationally and position ourselves as a leader in this space, which is super exciting. So we have projects now in, I think, 9 countries, partnered with KEPCO in Japan, and NASDAQ listed company in the US called Clearway, and the Malaysian government, Thai partner listed on the stock exchange with about 500 megawatts in its portfolio called BCPG.
Right.
So there's quite a lot of projects that we are involved in now that have the funding has provided us access to, and I think that it's this new and innovative form of capital raising, I think, has created more innovation and experimental business models that you can see in the blockchain space, distinct from not traditional sources of capital for early stage companies would be venture capital, and they have a view of what they want to fund, and it's based on where they see the biggest returns the quickest, and it's not always the best outcomes for society or what actually is the most viable longer term. And so I think that it was very exciting for us to be a company based in Perth and have that opportunity, and to be able to, notwithstanding the fact that we're not in Silicon Valley, to be in a leading position in that respect because of this new form of capital raising. And I think we're starting to see countries that want to prioritise blockchain sector in their countries and are developing regulations and legislation to be supportive of that, so that they see it as a form of competitive advantage and to drive more innovation, but also better outcome for customers. As an example, like in blockchain in the financial services sector, you're able to spin up technology services in a much more low-cost fashion than traditional infrastructure. And so that means that more products come to market which provide better outcomes for consumers. And so it's not just about creating these new business and enterprise, but it's the actual products and services that are delivered in that home market as well, and the value to the economy. So I think that you're starting to see countries that are getting ahead of that and really trying to become the blockchain cities of the future and centres of the future.
Right. So I was going to ask two questions. Number one, I want to find out, so Power Ledger, what's the business model? What sort of services do you provide? Is it a consulting model? Is it an equity model? Is it a hybrid? What's your business model in terms of revenue growth?
So depending on the product, so environmental commodity trading, so REC trading, is a percentage of the value of the RECs traded on our platform. And for peer-to-peer energy trading, it's a transaction fee based on the volume of electricity traded. And for the virtual power plant, it's what's called a software as a service. So it's a daily fixed charge to access the VPP network. So it varies from product to product, but all of them show revenue growth based on scale, which is a function of the amount of users, the amount of RECs traded, or the amount of energy that's traded.
Right. So so it sounds like you've got a very scalable model in terms of, because you've got access to global markets, haven't you?
Yeah. So I think that some of the challenges that blockchain faces, it's a new tech. So there's a lot more work that needs to be done around literacy for potential parties. So if you look at like Rogers' diffusion curve, which shows the adoption of new technologies, firstly you have innovators trialing it, then early adopters, then later adopters, and then the majority, and then the laggards. And so in the innovator and early adopter space, there's not a lot of scale. But then as those projects are proved up, or the technology is evidenced as working, then there's greater scale. And that's what we're seeing in our sector, where we initially had MVP, minimum viable products, and then proof of concept projects, and then commercial trials and commercial deployment. So we've just announced a commercial deployment in France with a retailer there called Equateur, who want to get to like 200,000 customers in the next 2 years, doing a tracking piece. So our product's called Vision, and what it means is customers can specify renewables in like that I want solar from this farm or wind from that farm, as opposed to I just generally want renewable energy. And so they're able to support the particular generation assets that they would like. And it might be ones that they, personally think are important or are close to them. So supporting localized electricity markets. And in the US, we have a partnership with a company called Clearway Energy, and they have 6 gigawatts of renewables in their portfolio and a big trader of renewable energy certificates. And so we see opportunities for large scale in that market as well. Just a couple of illustrations, but by and large, we're starting to see that glide path from small scale proof of concept projects to larger scale deployments.
Yeah, because you don't know if it's going to exactly work the way you envision it's going to work until you actually dive in and start running it.
Well, I think it's more that these utilities, to go back to the kind of fight, flight, or innovate, need to understand what's the commercial business model that's going to underpin these new products in the market. And so they need to get their head around that and understand what are the implications for their existing portfolio and how can they design these products so that they're really fit for purpose. There's a lot of experimentation going on, innovation around the tariffs and the product presentation to the market.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are supporting clients around that with consulting services as well. But yeah, these, I think historically, utilities move at a glacial speed,
Yeah,
but we're
do.
starting to see far faster kind of turnaround time and recognition as we're getting it to the pointy end of the market where they're like, oh, we need to actually make a call here. So we're seeing that kind of emerge in terms of more rapid decision making and literacy as well on the technology as well, and an understanding of the benefits that it provides, not just a shiny piece of tech, or you might see on your laptop Intel inside, but you don't actually know what that does. So they're now understanding, oh, this is the benefit to us and our market.
Right. So essentially, when you start a project, you're bringing expertise and IP, which basically educates the partner you're working with, and then you actually then can provide the technology then to actually then scale the revenue through, whether it's a software as a service subscription or whether it's taking a clip of the actual trading. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point that you make. We're not just about selling a piece of tech to the client. We really want to understand the market conditions they're in and what's of fundamental importance to them, where they would like to be in the next 12 months and longer, and how could our technology support them in achieving those ambitions. And so that's the process that we go through in scoping projects and partnerships.
Yeah, and you must come across a lot of different, because so many different governmental policies around the world and regulation. So they're almost, I suppose, each project is custom built from the ground up almost, but you bring the experience and expertise to that. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the different regulatory environments, we get asked a lot, is a regulation a barrier? I think that the answer to that is, in some markets, it doesn't work, but there's plenty of places for which the regulation makes our tech work and is fit for purpose. But understanding the market conditions and the regulation settings is key to designing a project. So, for example, in Malaysia, the cost of electricity for residential customers is much lower than commercial, and the government wants to increase the uptake of renewables in Malaysia. So if they can facilitate peer-to-peer trading from residential customers to commercial, the resi customer can sell their solar electricity at a premium to the commercial customer, and they're incentivized to put more solar in. But you've got to understand the dynamics in that market to come up with, that's a peer-to-peer project that would work really well there, by contrast to Europe, where provenance is more of a thing, or on the east coast of Australia, where volatility from too much wind and solar is driving the adoption of batteries to renewable energy certificates are huge in the US, $3 billion issued each year, but traded via brokers. So it's through these insights that you can see where the opportunities are for the tech to really add value and drive efficiencies.
Right. So what's the size of the team? Obviously, you've got a lot of expertise within and experience. So what's the size of the team today in 2020?
25 staff. I think about 25 staff in Perth.
Okay, cool. And do you have any sort of offices around the world? I suppose that is going to happen over time as you get, I suppose, traction in different countries, or is it all done pretty well remotely, or you send out like a SWAT team to actually do some work?
I mean, pre-COVID, we've done a lot of traveling to these places, but we also do have channel partners in different locations. So in Thailand, we have a partner there, a channel partner, BCPG. In Europe, we have a number of partners, and in the US as well. And so they also assist us in getting our technology into those markets, as well as us traveling out there as well.
Yeah. One of the biggest challenges I heard from many entrepreneurs is actually scaling a business. So you are actually starting to scale your business by actually working with partners that actually have, I suppose, contacts and knowledge of an industry already on the ground. So do you see that as strategic for you moving forward to actually build that sort of distribution globally, so you actually can scale your company?
Yes, absolutely. I don't think we'll have a generic way we do it. Different markets necessitate different ways of doing that. But yeah, absolutely. I think that is for us, rapidly democratizing power and enabling citizen utilities is something that is really a fundamental importance to Powerledger as a company. And looking at ways that we can do that with speed is really important. So partnerships that can facilitate that is really key.
Yeah. And because that is the biggest challenge, to actually get your message out to the world, and also your technology and your IP out, that you want to make. You also, it's an arms race as well. You're playing with other companies around the world, and the arms race is not just technology. The arms race is actually distribution and sales,
Correct.
and so. And quite often, funding enables you to do that. I'm on the board of 2 startups, and that's certainly, you just can't. You just got to keep running as fast as possible.
Yeah, I think you do. You got to drill a lot of holes, like you would if you're a mining oil and gas company, and see where the wells are. And yeah, it's speed to scale, literally.
Yeah. So, what are some of the other? So basically, you've got the funding, worked the way through using blockchain technology. So, what are some of the other challenges you found with growing the business and managing it?
Everything.
Yeah, how long have you got? She's saying to me, frankly, I think, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's like there was literally something, every day. I saw this graph. I think if you Google like life as an entrepreneur, it's this funny graph, and it kind of goes like a zigzag, and it goes, everything's going well, everything's going terrible, everything's going well, everything's going terrible.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a boiler room. It's a very intense experience, and you are doing a lot of things, and you don't know exactly which one is going to come off first or the biggest. And so, yeah, it's quite a roller coaster, and it's not for the faint-hearted, and it requires a lot of effort. But when you start to see the proof points of it working, that is inherently thrilling, and propels you forward. Particularly also if you've got this big motivator, like a bigger mission that you're trying to accomplish. But I thought I had a keen, kind of commercial acumen by virtue of my banking history, but you don't realize that not all of that translates to working in a startup.
No.
There's so many things that you would do differently, but by and large, if you make enough good decisions over and above ones that haven't worked out, you're still thriving and propelling yourself forward, and that's the way that we look at it. But yeah, there's challenges on every level and every front.
Yeah. One of the best quotes I heard was from Danny Yenny recently, who I talked to. He's a good friend of mine, and he went to one of the top venture capitals entrepreneurs, venture capital fund CEOs, and he noticed his desk was completely clean, not even a computer on it. And he's going, and this is in San Francisco, right? And there was a working lunch, sandwich on a desk. Anyway, he said, why you got such a clean desk? And these guys said, well, I've realized as an entrepreneur that it's not the quantity of work you do, it's the quality of the decisions you make. And I went, wow, that's so true.
Yeah, it's absolutely a very powerful insight. And if you make poor decisions, that can create a lot of extra work for you as well.
Well, this entrepreneur actually spends 3 to 4 hours a day walking. So I went, okay, that's an interesting way. But he, just to get his head clear.
I think that for me was the kind of big revelation from the sabbatical that I took, because I went on all these walking trips, and I wasn't a hiker or walker beforehand, but I did find that it was just so good at distilling my thinking. And you made that comment at the beginning about, stepping out of the matrix essentially. And I think that that provided, new opportunities to think and ideas that ultimately, have led me to this situation that I find myself in right now. But the walking as a kind of daily practice, notwithstanding the fact that you are still in the matrix, I think provides access to that same kind of level of faculty and thinking. And it's a bit hard for me at the moment to walk large distances, because I'm nearly 8 months pregnant. But
I have heard that rumor.
But I'm very much looking forward to being able to truck around again at a fast speed rather than in slow motion. It's fascinating about you talking about that 9 month sabbatical provided the silence and the space for actually creative thinking and ideas to actually show up. And my biggest inspirations come from downtimes as well. I was between jobs, 12 years ago before I started jeffbullis.com. And but because I had the downtime, I did a lot of reading, I had the space and time to actually observe and watch. And the opportunity came out of the silence.
And this is something I think, we often wear busyness as a badge of honor. Look how frantically busy I am. But it's very hard for ideas and clarity to emerge out of that when there's so much noise.
White noise.
Yeah, absolutely, white noise. And I walk twice a day, also cycle, and I actually meditate at least once a day. And I give myself 20 minutes trying to quieten the mind. And I read the most fabulous book I read in the last 10 or 12 years by a Michael Singer. He ended up running one of America's biggest medical practices software companies called Untethered Soul. And he then wrote another book called The Surrender Experiment, which is basically that if you're willing to be silent, and the world actually will show up in the most unexpected and glorious ways. And it doesn't mean you're not doing anything. It just means you're surrendered to the beautiful imperfection that we have on this planet and as we are as humans. Mm-hmm. And The Untethered Soul is one of the best books I've read in terms of the art and science of actually learning to be quiet and still the mind and get stuff done.
Yeah, I admire people that are able to sit and meditate. I find walking is my kind of equivalent of that. But you're right. I think whatever it is that gives you access to that stillness and peace, I think that's where true creativity originates from.
Yeah. Well, for me, what I've discovered too is that meditation actually isn't stopping just for 20 minutes. It's actually the art of just observing and trying to still the mind and noticing the chatter that the observer, us being the soul, observing the chattering person. It's like if you're just aware first to actually go, this person is chattering about crap, right? I don't know what even that, because it's uninvited chatter, as we know. So there's things that are inspired by input, such as what we watch and listen to. But then on the other hand, it's just conversations, which about 90% of the conversations ahead just show up uninvited. And I was talking to a psychologist friend of mine recently, and the name he gave to it was the evil uncle. They just show up on your they knock on your front door going, you should have done this, you should have done that, looks what happened in the past, what's going to happen in the future. If you actually allowed them into your home, you would kick them out if they're actually a physical person. So he called it the evil uncle, and I thought it was a very, very good analogy, frankly. So, but I'm really, just to hear your story, especially that the 9-month sabbatical was, from my observation, is maybe the start of the inspiration. We met someone, and then the rest of the journey unfolded, and you never said there was no grand plan to be an entrepreneur. So I'm aware of your time. So I suppose what I'd like to do, just to wrap it up, is to the other listeners on this, the Jeff Bullis Show, the podcast, what are some of the major lessons you've learned along the way in this journey as an entrepreneur, and that you would like to share, maybe 2 or 3 things you've learned along the way that you think are really important for those that are actually thinking of starting a business or already running a business?
Well, I think that you have to really back yourself and believe in yourself to take on a project like that. And that doesn't mean that you always get it right. So you have to accept that you're going to make lots of mistakes, and that you don't want to be ashamed of those. You have to kind of wear them as a kind of badge of honor, or have a failure resume of some kind, and use them as learning experiences for you and the other people that you work with. So I think that's really important. So it's not about, you got to back yourself, but you can't expect yourself to be perfect.
Yep.
And you got to rapidly learn from those and get beyond them, get back on the horse, to use that kind of cliche.
Yep.
What else? I think you have to really have something that you're passionate about on some fundamental level,
yes.
because the amount of work that's involved is profound and vast.
Yes.
And if you don't have that, you won't do what is required to get there.
Yes.
And then I think you need good people around you that you can have trust in, that can support you, and that's both in the business and also in your outside of that, in your personal life.
Right.
Really important, because there will be trying times, and you need to have people that you can count on and rely on for support.
Right.
I think they're 3 critical sort of elements, if you like.
I think that's a very important observation. And so number one, you said that you need to back yourself. and then learn from, the mistakes you learn from that along the way. Number two is to keep learning, and especially in the digital world we live today, we're in the middle of the fastest changing business environment we've seen ever, and also getting great people. And I think they're great observations. So I would like to thank you very much, Jemma, for making the time to come on the show, and thank you for sharing your insights and your journey. I think you are in the middle of making an amazing change to the planet, and I look forward to actually watching Power Ledger grow and make a difference, because I think you're in a place where creating a sustainable planet that democratizes and gives power back to the people in terms of and taking responsibility for it as well. I think it's an amazing space for you to be playing in. So I look forward to hearing more, and we might even, we might have a chat later on down the track to see where things are unfolding. But thank you very much, Jemma, for taking the time. It's been an absolute pleasure to meet you. And thank you.
Been great to be part of this conversation. Thank you for having me, and have a great day.
Thank you, Jemma.
Take care.